Two of the fantasy football season, and here's a few running backs I would look to start this week. The first guy, Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. And Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, a great 1-2 punch over the last few seasons. And in week one, they really put in work versus the Carolina Panthers. So right here, Nick Chubb in week one, a good ball game, 22 carries, 141 rush yards, and 1 catch for 2 yards. Obviously, we know Chubb's not a big receiver out of the backfield, and the passing down role goes to Kareem Hunt. But right here in week two, got a good matchup versus the New York Jets, even though we know Kenyon Drake didn't do much in that ball game. But this Jet defense, they got holes. They got problems up front. And Nick Chubb's a physical running back that I think in this ball game at the home, in the dog pound here, he's going to get 80, 90 total yards and at least find the end zone once. So I like Nick Chubb this week as a top 12 running back, and I think he has a good ball game versus the New York Jets. And it's going to be a ball game where the Browns, they're going to try to solidify the run early and often because Jacoby Brissett, not the greatest of quarterbacks. So right here, I like Chubb this week. The next guy is Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Joe Mixon, he was a top pick in the first, second round of most fantasy drafts this season. And he continued where he left off last year in week one. 27 carries, 82 yards, 7 catches, 63 receiving yards versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, who obviously are good and stout defense. And now he's got a matchup at the Dallas Cowboys, who obviously they're pretty solid defense as well. But this defense is going to be on the field a lot, especially with Dak Prescott out. I think we could see a lot of 3-and-outs for this Cowboy offense, or a lot of turnover on the field as well. So Joe Mixon, good running back. He could do it all. He's a workhorse. And this week, I think he has a monster ball game as Mixon, where I think he could crack 20-plus fantasy points at the Dallas Cowboys. We saw Leonard Fournette go over 100 total yards versus the Cowboys. And I think Joe Mixon could do the same with finding the end zone as well. So he's definitely a running back I would start this week. The next guy, DAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions. So DAndre Swift last week had a monster ball game in fantasy leagues with Swift, and PPR leagues with 24 fantasy points. So right here, Swift didn't get the goal line touches. Went to Javonte Williams, who vultured him twice in that week one matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. But Swift, he could catch the ball. He's explosive down the field. The only concerning thing to me here, he only had 18 touches in that ball game, even though we know Philly was up early and big early in the ball game, even though they only won by 3 points. But Swift this week's got a good matchup versus the Washington Commanders. We saw James Robinson have a good ball game, and we saw Travis Etienne have a good ball game as well. So DAndre Swift, he's a guy that's a must start every week here. But I'm reminding people, even though his touches were down a little bit, and he took the goal line touches from him, was Jamal Williams. I still like DAndre Swift as a start this week, and he's a guy that I think could once again crack the 20 fantasy point mark. The next running back's Darrell Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams. So Cam Akers, a lot of people thought would be the clear-cut starter coming into the season, but Darrell Henderson got most of the work in week one. 13 carries, 47 rush yards, 5 catches, and 26 receiving yards. So right here, Cam Akers had the old goose egg, and he only had 3 touches in that ball game in week one versus the Buffalo Bills, who obviously are a great defense. But here in week two, I think Darrell Henderson could have a good ball game versus the Atlanta Falcons, even though I know the New Orleans Saints running backs, Kamara and Mark Ingram, didn't do much in that ball game. But the game script's going to be different. The Rams here are going to get back on track. It's another home game here in SoFi for this Ram team. And Darrell Henderson, a lot of people have been sleeping on him over the last few seasons, but when he's healthy, he's been a solid number 2 running back for fantasy owners each and every week. And this week here, I think he could score anywhere from 12 to 15 fantasy points. And as a number 2 running back option, that's pretty solid. I think this week's, and the 5th and final running back I look to start this week, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Javonte Williams, a lot of screen passes and a lot of receptions in week one for him versus Seattle Seahawks. The only problem, he didn't get a lot of carries, and that ball game was close the whole game. 4-7 points at most they were down. So Javonte, 7 carries, only 43 rush yards. Him and Melvin Gordon splitting the carries, it looks like, still here. And he had 11 catches for 65 yards, which obviously I don't expect him to get 11 catches again here, is Javonte Williams, because I think Wilson's going to stretch the field a little more in week 2 versus a weaker Houston Texan defense, even though the Seattle Seahawks defense definitely surprised, even with Jamal Adams going out with the torn quad, with his season possibly being in jeopardy. But right here, Javonte Williams has a good matchup. Even splitting the backfield with Melvin Gordon, had a solid fantasy day with 19.8 points in PPR leagues. And once again, I think he has a good game versus Houston. So that's a few running backs I would look to start here for week 2 of the fantasy football season.